What is Xcloud? Probably many of you already heard about what we do, and not many are new faces today, but very quickly, Xcloud is a CSA, so a coordination and support action. And CSAs in the Constellation of View projects have specific roles that are meant to support, on one side, the Commission into engaging with the community and understanding what are the trends from the research point of view, but also from the application on the market point of view. And so to build on top of this knowledge that is collected with our help through the community, to build plans for the years to come, both in terms of research policy, that in terms of other more market-oriented policies. Besides these activities of somehow bridging the community with the Commission, of course, then there is the other set of activities that are more about, in the end, community building and to bring and engage the community, to bring the community at the same table, to all of them exchange information on their point of view, on their ongoing research, and so on. And of course, this is just a little subset, let's say, of the activities. And really, in the past 2 years, we have been doing many activities in this direction. And in the end, all of these activities have been the important role for us to, even though they were not maybe strategically meant directly for that purpose, but they have been a mean for us to understand what the industry and research is doing in Europe, and what are their recommendation, also ideas for what should be the next type of activities. And of course, this was content that we exchanged during technical community events, and we are also having one now in a few days in March, so I hope some of you will be able to attend. We have been running different expert consultation. The last one were actually in October. We have been running events for the Commission to provide the view of different research experts on the work programs topics, and also on the one already open and the one to be yet opened. And of course, we have been doing also more wide and open events like the summit in December, where we really tried to bring together all these different views from the research, from the policy, from the industry, and also from the industry, not only in terms of, let's say, vendor of cloud solutions, but also in terms of end users. And in the end, as I was saying, this all for us was key way to get a view of different actors coming from different background on many different aspects that were, in the end, we tried to boil down in different items inside our portfolio of outcomes and services to the community and to the Commission. Just to mention that one of the actions that was instrumental for us in all this analysis effort was the landscaping, where we have been collecting interviews and analysis of research projects, but not only research projects, even public initiatives, in some countries for the establishment of public cloud infrastructure, other private initiatives using edge solutions that are putting at forefront some specific novel requirements from the different actors that are now trying to push the adoption of edge solutions. And so this is really, I invite you to have a look. You can, if you have a company and you have a product or a solution that fits the framework of cloud computing landscape in Europe, I invite all of you also to submit your profile there, and this is of course possible and will be to be reached. This online catalog is also let's say complemented by a deliverable that you can find on our website that discuss a bit more in general the summary of the landscape and the derived insights from it. Well, this was, as I was saying, with the community events and this detailed landscape analysis were one of the main items, together with the policy context, that we have been using to boil down to what Mark will present you today. So all these action, even though maybe they were serving different community needs and commission needs, were orchestrated together and distilled in the white paper that condense all our findings in this respect. And in case you haven't downloaded yet, here is a quick way for you to get the link to download the current version of the white paper that we will further refine with the feedbacks we collect in these days through this event or through the online surveys. It is also important to mention, and probably Mark will explain further, but we kept the general framework in the white paper and we extracted from there, especially for those of you who have acquaintance with the green paper that was released at the end of 2020. We extracted the recommendation and we made them an actionable tool on the website, which means it's easy to browse them and to filter them depending on different dimension and also free text search. And we hope that this makes even easier for the different actor to just focus on the one that are relevant for them. And of course, these are also referred into the different surveys that we released with the white paper video summaries. And yeah, the thing is that, of course, our project is now in a month or so coming to an end, but this is, of course, just the start for many things. And I'm taking the chance to use this slide from Pierre-Yves Chastanier, the lead of the Cloud Computing Unit and Services in the Commission, to just overview the action that somehow are linked with the activities we have been doing in the project, and to which the recommendations are, of course, as well strongly linked. And clearly you see that there are a number of policy elements. Some are already quite defined, some are yet to be released, like, for example, the cloud rule book. And these all have the goal to contribute to different activities, some on the research spectrum, other more on the deployment and support to go-to-market action, like the Digital Europe program, and other that are more industrial driven like IPCA, which is an important project of common European interest for next generation cloud, which is clearly a strategic initiative that is taking up the provision of cloud solution and infrastructure from the bottom layers, including the chip design aspects. And in terms of, I don't want to spend much time on the research work programs, but you also know that for sure that there have been a number of work program published, some for Horizon Europe, some calls are already closed. Of course, the one in October on Meta operating system, but others are open, and the deadline is in April. But beyond that, Commission is also working on the future of the work programs, and several of the outcomes of the strategic analysis we have been doing in the end are actually building up in these programs. And say that I want also to highlight that while it is true that Xcloud is coming to an end, there is another project that will go on, another CSA that is partially running in parallel with Xcloud, that is taking our baton, and that is going on till the end of September. And most probably at that point, one of the CSAs that were pointed out to call it for in the October call should be already starting and taking the baton even for up for cloud, and taking further the supporting activities for the community and for the Commission in this domain. In this sense, I think it is important to mention a key aspect, which is that the new CSA will not just be on cloud as a matter of fact, or edge. It's more about the convergence of different aspects that are part of the computing continuum. So somehow it bridges different communities beyond the one that were central in Xcloud, that are central in Up for Cloud. And say that, thank you very much again for joining us today. And of course, I'm happy to answer. If you have any questions, just please type in the chat. I will answer. Meanwhile, I leave the floor to Mark for the more specific activities related to the consultation.
Thank you, Federico. I'm just looking at my arm to see if I have that tattoo, but I don't. I guess I missed the visit to the tattoo parlor for the Xcloud tattoo. Anyway, thank you everyone for joining us today. What I'm going to try to do, and the first thing I'm going to try to do is to share the screen, display the PowerPoint. But what we're going to try to do is quickly go through the structure of the strategic analysis, the white paper that we've called it in the past, and then to give you a chance to speak to any of the points, any of the sections, offer comments or questions. And then at the end, we'll start focusing on where the community has expressed its, shall we say, its preferences in terms of concentration, as well as outlining some of the recommendations that we are presenting and offering to the community through these online surveys to get the feedback on. So I will now perform the magic activity of displaying. And how are we doing? Do I have the right slide showing?
Yes, Mark.
Perfect. It's always so, that's the hardest part. The rest is easy. Okay, we've had a quick overview from Federico, so I won't get into a lot of detail. I will make one quick point, and that is that Federico has mentioned the influence that this project may have on Horizon Europe. It also is expected to have an influence on follow-up calls of Digital Europe, because there was a specific request by the Commission to have this project think not just about research, but also about deployment. So our agenda is to quickly walk through the policy context and some cloud adoption statistics to put that in perspective. We'd like to walk through our Xcloud strategic model or strategic map for how digital transformation is supported by a strong European IT services market, including the cloud, as well as underlying foundations. Talk about the community priorities that we've heard, and then explore some of the recommendations and how they map to these different areas. So our policy context, quite quickly, I'm not going to dwell on this. There are a lot of quite a few documents from the Commission: Shaping Europe's Digital Future, a European Strategy for Data. That was in Pierre Chastenay's slide that Federico showed. New Industrial Strategy for Europe, Next Generation Europe, as well as the Green Deal and many of the sort of implementation actions in specific sectors. They all talk about data ecosystems, they talk about digital transformation. So this runs through almost every area of the EC's thinking. So it's quite important to think about it in that perspective. In terms of the kind of targets of our actions, in addition to policy, we expect to see impact on Horizon Europe, Digital Europe, that's an old slide, sorry, and then Connecting Europe Facility 2. So where does cloud computing stand in Europe? For those of you who've taken a look at the document, this chart is split out a little bit, but I wanted to just quickly review it. These are Eurostat statistics. They have two measures, kind of a sophisticated and a less sophisticated definition of cloud adoption. So we capture all of that, and you'll notice in the box at the far left that for the EU 27 as a whole, adoption at the lower level is quite high. It's probably on the order of 60 or low 70% of enterprises. Whereas the adoption at the higher level, the more sophisticated use of cloud, is probably something more on the order of high 30, 40% across Europe. There is obviously a huge split between the behavior of small and large organizations, and we highlight that here. The numbers are dominated by the experience for SMEs, but we do have the small number of large enterprises that have an oversized impact on the economy and on the access to cloud across Europe. And finally, looking at across, not all the EU 27 countries are shown here, but just exploring the diversity of the range of take-up. And there is a lot of range. The Nordic countries are, as they are in several contexts, high adopters, early adopters, whereas some of the bigger economies in Europe are a little lower, and we know, of course, that are not shown, but there are plenty of parts of Europe that are far below this, as we can see by the EU 27 overall statistics, which frankly are lower than everything I'm showing here on this chart on a country basis. If you compare it to surveys, I think Europe, if you look, you can see France and Germany in this list. We're pretty much in line in Europe compared to a lot of other economies. So I think the argument that the cloud is not being adopted in Europe is too simplistic a statement. I think there are some important issues, some important obstacles, but it's not a situation where Europe is simply not taking advantage of the cloud. There are situations that we have to think about. So let me pause here, and if there are any questions or comments, I would be very interested in hearing from you. So this is your opportunity for some feedback. And you can raise your hand or blurt something out. Okay, I'm not hearing anything, so I'm going to move on. Let's talk about digital transformation and digitalization. At the end of the day, it's digital transformation that we want. Whether we use the cloud or some fancy things in your on-premise data center, in fact, is not the real issue. The real issue is whether European organizations are taking advantage of the opportunities that new information technology approaches allow to improve their businesses. And some of these digital transformations relate to just improving processes, and others are quite transformational. They change their business. They go from being a manufacturer to being a service provider of some sort, or a broker of information. So there's a radical transformation of the business. So what we're interested in is what is necessary to support that kind of transformational change. So we've boiled it down to two factors. One is being data aware. In other words, having an ability to gather and work with the data from a lot of different sources, and then having gotten the data, working with that to drive innovation. And so if you read the IT literature, you hear conversations about having a single view of your customers, a single view of your operations, understanding your data, doing predictions and optimization. All of that depends on data. And then it also depends on having the tools, the toolkit, if you will, that allows that to happen. And then the be all and end all is when you actually move from a kind of a static view of data to a real-time data situation. And as an organization, you're able to respond in real time and adjust your value, the way you deliver value to your customers. So we have data awareness as kind of the top level layer, or the final layer of our strategic map, fed by data, being data driven, fed by support for a stronger EU cloud or EU IT services market more generally, and then supported by underlying foundational elements. So any questions or concerns about this strategic map? Okay, I'm moving on. Let's talk about data awareness and explore that a bit. Again, I'm going to move quickly. The purpose here is not to give you a full understanding, it's to give you a taste and generate some feedback from you. Data awareness. Where is the data coming from? It's coming, it's giving you want a better ability to use the data you already have. You want to better use the data that's out in the world, and I call that edge data. And we want to access data from partners. Often that is those are the people who hold the data that are interesting to you as an organization. So we need tools and processes for respecting and maintaining data sovereignty and privacy rights. This is when you have internal data that has sensitivity. So it's personal data covered by the GDPR. The DGA and the new Data Act, which has come out. There may be IP or confidential data, critical infrastructure concerns, data about individuals that are collected by machines. This is, as I understand it, a big topic of the Data Act. We already have this in agricultural data and smart living data, even endangered species or indigenous people. So these are categories of sensitive data that we need tools as organizations, as users, to better manage this in a coherent way. As we go outside of the organization and think about that operational technology that is running our pipelines and our factories and our monitoring our highways and so forth, how is that data being collected from the edge? And the interesting thing is that this is not a new situation. The data has been sitting out there because the assets are sitting out there. Where are the assets? It's government infrastructure, especially in a municipal context, vehicles and rolling stock, roads, rail lines, ports, airports, electricity grids, healthcare, distributed healthcare systems, a complicated manufacturing supply chain, smart products with tagging of the flow of commodity products through the supply chain, tagging agricultural products and packaging, as well as livestock and generally food safety tracking. So there are just hundreds of use cases involving data at the edge. And then lastly, we need to be able to work with our partners in secure, trustworthy data sharing. And here we have a number of requirements. I'm repeating the points made in the document: value propositions, helping to assess whether data can be shared, preparing data for sharing, having good reusable models for governance, as well as underlying IT solutions that can be used, and then finally, special tools and platforms for very large or very sensitive data sets. Any questions or comments at this point? Okay. So let's talk about data-driven. Here we move from grabbing data to starting to do something useful with it. And I do want to make the point here that this strategic map or model is not intended to suggest that step number one for any organization is to grab as much data as they can. Clearly that's an issue. Clearly that's not the way we need to approach it. There needs to be an application-driven assessment of what data is needed. We simply want to take away the barriers to accessing the data that from a reasonable standpoint should be incorporated into the activities. So what are the steps required to enable data-driven activities? And in many cases, the first step is for an organization is actually to use a cloud-based CRM system or a cloud-based ERP system, because it gives you those, as an organization, it gives organizations that best practice ability to sort of move directly to a high level of functionality from a data-driven standpoint. So that's the adopting cloud style technology and technology stacks. So there are challenges there. The technology landscape is rapidly evolving, and that makes makes a CIO's job hard. Open source is a big piece of the cloud, the native cloud world, but EU organizations in general have been less involved than they might be as compared to, say, some of their US or Chinese compatriots in really getting their hands dirty and working with open source. Proprietary solutions are also important. They are typically involved, but that also introduces questions about the so-called respect for European values, as well as the possibility of technical lock-in. There have been some reports that systems integrators that operate in Europe are I wouldn't say that they're biased against EU-based approaches, but they certainly are more adept at, for example, implementing Amazon Web Services for a company, and that may be their go-to solution, and it may be the preference of the actual customer organization. And finally, if you're looking for a sovereign solution, you need a sovereign technology stack that extends not only from the software, but all the way down to the underlying hardware. So that's a bit of a challenge today. In many cases, people don't know where the software is coming from, what the dependencies are, et cetera. So these are possible points of risk that people are concerned about. We move from the technology to the human side, and there's a real need for skills to support this kind of adoption. There's new skills and practices needed for the information technology community, new skills and practices for management. This is not just an isolated, siloed IT decision. Management needs to be involved. There need to be resources to support use of open source, not only for its use, but also to effectively contribute to open source and to use that as a learning opportunity. The scale of human resources is often a challenge for smaller organizations. So there's a lot to learn, a lot to know. So how does a small or medium-sized enterprise or a small government entity handle that? How do they approach the cloud when they may not have that kind of capability? And then in general, they're in Europe and frankly, around the world, there are not so many people that have the right skills. So this is a challenge worldwide. How do we achieve the performance and reliability that we want from a cloud-based capability? First, you have to optimize the software that you're using to run in the cloud, and a simple lift and shift strategy is often not the most performant or reliable solution. And finally, how you deploy and manage those software solutions onto cloud-style resources. That in itself is a non-trivial and an ongoing activity that needs to be given more attention than it may have been given in an on-premise IT environment. Security and privacy is important. You know, we are operating outside the firewall by definition. So what tools are available? There's been just a lot of discussion of codes of conduct, certifications, compliance, labels, you know, kind of, if you will, it's a, you know, you pick up the box of cereal and there's a little block there that says it has so many calories, it has so many vitamins, a certain amount of sugar and carbohydrates. So it's sort of a statement about what's in the box. And it's kind of up to you what you do with that. You know, do you mix the cereal with milk, low-fat milk, full-fat milk, you know, heavy cream? That's going to affect your dietary experience. And in the same way, cloud users have this shared responsibility in achieving the security and privacy that's necessary. And in fact, they are ultimately they have the responsibility. So it isn't even shared. It's just something that there's a few less things for the cloud user to worry about. I'm just looking at the comment, and there is the need to bring trust on digital transformation in cloud at times when CyberX, clearly, you know, so that's not an easy solution. It's not an easy problem to solve. So this is a start, but it's only one tool in the kit. Build versus buy, and more generally, questions about procurement and management resources and so on. Legacy applications are often being replaced by new combinations of cloud-based services, sort of a mashup, if you will. Some may be purchased, some may be licensed, some may be open source. So you know, the sort of the neat and tidy world of buying hardware and software and installing it in your data center to meet your needs is now being replaced by a not so tidy world with lots of options and lots of different ways, including lots of ways to buy, lots of ways to acquire the resources you need. The traditional capital expenditure is being replaced more and more by operating expenditures. We also have procurement processes, especially in public administration, that are not aligned with the way the cloud business runs. And finally, a comment about legacy applications. These exist. They are often the great big elephant in the room or the 800-pound gorilla for a lot of organizations. They have key legacy applications, and they're struggling in some cases to figure out how to refactor, re-engineer, and reassess those. Okay, comments, questions about where we are?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, who's this?
Yes, this is Ariana Boliviu from Innovact. I'm here representing Physics Project. So many thanks for the very insightful presentation so far. My question is more relevant to the information you have presented about cloud adoption. And I was wondering whether you have any indications from the data collected so far on whether the fact that cloud moves the vendor, away from location-wise, away from the area in which it's proximal to the company, whether that affects the intention of an organization to adopt cloud. So what I mean is that traditionally the vendors used to be.
Excuse me, Ariana. Yeah? Ariana, can you just say it more slowly? There's something with your audio, and I'm really getting. Okay. I'm not getting enough syllables.
So yes, what I was saying is whether you have any indications about the relevance of vendor proximity when it comes to cloud adoption. So before cloud, we used to have the vendor in a proximal geographical proximity with the organization. Now it's, it can be anywhere. So did you find any information on this relationship or?
That's a really good question. We don't have any statistics about it. Clearly it is a factor, if you dive into the sort of the anthropology, if you will, of the relationship of a cloud buying organization and the various vendors that they're talking to. It's quite a complicated dance that goes on, and the relationship between, one user, let's say in, a municipality in Italy making some decisions, who do they talk to? Do they talk to Amazon? Do they talk to, TIM? Do they talk to, any of these organizations? Are they local? So that's sort of a whole study in and of itself in terms of the relationship between actual service providers and the various customers, and the best way to get to the customer. Is it local? What's the best way to organize that? And what do users want? So I don't have answers to that question, but it is a very good question. And I think we should make a comment about that in our own report. So thank you for the comment. Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, let's go on then. Thank you. Okay, there we go. So I want to talk about the cloud services market a little bit, but let's start by kind of seeing where we are. So the first is, at a very high level, we've combined some statistics from IDC and GDP data from the United Nations. Other sources are possible, but at a very rough level, what we're seeing is that the total public cloud market, as tracked by IDC, represents a very interesting small percentage, but a very interesting differing percentage of the different GDP markets. So in the EU 27, public cloud spending is 0.3% of the total EU 27 GDP. In the US, public cloud spending is 0.83%. So that's nearly 3 times bigger on a proportional basis. Now, I don't want to draw huge conclusions from that, but it is interesting. And then if you look at the UK spending, it's about 0.5%. We do think that there's some rough correlation between the extent of GDP being spent on public cloud in a country and its the level of adoption that we're seeing, say, in those Eurostat statistics. So there's a bit of a relationship there, and it basically quite broadly suggests that the EU 27, if they're going to see the kind of adoption that are being seen in other countries, you're going to have to see a doubling, potentially a tripling of spending on the public cloud if we're going to enable the kind of transformative activities that are hoped for. So this is a very rough statement. I don't want, this is not sort of well-referenced peer-reviewed science, but it is an interesting correlate relationship that I think we need to keep in mind. So as we look at the IDC data about how the markets are structured, let me just explain the charts. You'll see the legends over at the far right. The blue pie segment and then the red pie segment is infrastructure as a service with the top 3 players, and then the rest of the market. The yellow and green is the platform as a service market, again, top 3 players, and then the rest of the market. And then the orange and teal segments is software as a service, again, top 3 and the rest of the market. If we drill into the infrastructure as a service and platform as a service market, particularly infrastructure, the interesting thing is the flip in concentration between the United States, which is not concentrated. There are a lot of players in this space, and they have significant market shares. By contrast, in Europe and the UK, you have the top 3 really owning a big chunk of the infrastructure as a service market. And moreover, those top 3 players are US based in every case. So basically, if you're somebody who works at Amazon in competitive strategy, you're going to say, you know what, the European market is as important to me as the US market, and I'm going to defend that market share. So we need to be aware of that kind of interesting competitive dynamic. Now, as we move increasingly away from this central cloud technology model and think about the edge, we don't know how big the edge market is going to be. I've just put some purple blobs there just to say that it's not in the pie chart already. We don't know how big it's going to be. It's clearly going to be proportional to the overall market, but who knows? But there is an opportunity to shift the point of competition, the place where customers and suppliers meet, away from the current highly hyperscaler dominated market to an entirely different market that would by definition be much more local. And finally, the software as a service market is quite fragmented. And this is a universal situation. It's the case in the United States, it's the case in the EU, as well as the case in the UK. So there is a lot of opportunity there, but there are challenges. So the one challenge is competing in this fragmented EU market of 27 different member states with different rules and different languages, and finding capable infrastructure and platform as a service partners on which to build and provide their services. So are EU software as a service providers using US providers, or are they using people from Europe? So there's a real opportunity there potentially to influence this process. Questions or comments at this point? Okay, moving on. So what steps can we take to strengthen the EU IT services market? So, well, first, who is in the market? Clearly, there are non-European headquartered hyperscalers. There may be some actions that are appropriate in that context, but that's kind of above our pay grade in terms of discussing global trade flows and competition rules. We can make some recommendations that relate to how the EU-based IaaS and PaaS providers are operating. There are concerns, there have been concerns about scale issues. Clearly, if you're dealing with a global organization with resources around in every time zone, that gives them an ability to offer sort of physical diversity that may not be possible to the same degree from an EU-based provider. What is their capacity to offer different technology stacks? Again, this is a scale question. It's possible to do on almost any of the EU providers, but it often requires skills on the part of the customer to build the stack that they want, whereas if they go to an Amazon, it might be there off the shelf. Systems integrators, as I've mentioned before, may have a little less experience with the EU. Well, they have more experience with the non-EU stacks and less experience with the native EU stacks. SME skills gaps, mentioned before. This is the flip side of the problem on the data-driven side. Market awareness. Many EU organizations are just not as aware, simply by the strength of the marketing efforts of these major players. They're not as aware of the EU players. And these EU players have not always benefited in the way that, say, an Amazon or an Azure or Microsoft might have in the United States from significant procurements in those countries. So there's perhaps an opportunity to give our local providers a little bit of a leg up. Looking at the software as a service and independent software vendor side, clearly there's an opportunity, as I mentioned, in the context of legacy applications, converting those to software as a service, as well as creating more links to big data analytics and AI tools. These are use cases that are driving a lot of many companies into the public cloud. So if there were more of these native links from the software providers, this might provide a more of a natural hook. It's important to remember that we talk a lot about the cloud, but digital transformation does not require the cloud. And many companies, many organizations are making strategic decisions not to move to the cloud. They are keeping stuff on premise for, good strategic and security and privacy reasons. So we need to make sure that that's an equivalently acceptable approach and support that. Hybrid, multi-cloud, and federation. Hybrid and multi-cloud is becoming the norm across the cloud industry in terms of how organizations are tapping into these resources. So in almost every case, an organization is trying to mix and match their capabilities across different cloud providers, and their own on-premise capabilities. So this is a huge topic, and we'll talk more about that as we go forward. And finally, kind of allied to that is how the edge will emerge, because to some extent, this is sort of a worser problem than the multi-cloud problem, because as you move from those central, whether it's an on-premise or a central cloud data center, to what is likely to be a multitude of edge-based, field-based IT assets, you have the same kind of multi-cloud problem, integration problems, only on a much larger scale. So they're tightly connected, these two problems. So comments, questions at this point? Okay, so let's talk about the foundations a little bit. So there are a couple of important foundational elements. Skills has been something we've touched on in a couple of different contexts. However, it is out of scope for the Horizon Cloud project, and we wanted to make a place for it, and kind of, it's like building, getting ready for a future washroom, a future bathroom. You want to run the pipes there, even though you're not ready to install the toilet. I think we need to create some plumbing to allow for skills initiatives to feed into the cloud strategy as well. But there's clearly a need for increased skill development and skill exploitation in Europe. Security, intrinsic security, is also something we've talked about a couple of times, and I'll offer a couple of recommendations. We'll offer a couple of recommendations on that. I think the biggest one is one of carbon neutral digital transformation. So are we building all of these pillars, these pieces of our strategic map on a carbon neutral foundation? This is not the same as energy efficient. Energy efficient is a kind of a weak sister to carbon neutral, and carbon neutral is what we want to go for. So let's talk about that a little bit. The common focus is usually on the data center, where we think about power utilization effectiveness, the favorite metric, but that's only a piece of the picture. We see increasing power density of compute equipment, which is changing the nature and the requirements within the data center, more liquid cooling, other opportunities to reuse waste heat, or to be generally more effective with water usage. Now, where does the data center get its power? So PUE ignores carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. So carbon offsets are accounting. They are not sustainable. And in fact, if you look at the US hyperscalers, they're being very clear that they're not solving their problems with carbon offsets. They are saying, we are identifying actual renewable power sources to feed our data centers, and we are locating data centers where we can take advantage of those things. So this is a pretty important trend going on by the big players, and it's something we need to think about how Europe can enable this. Now, there are mechanisms that allow us to link data centers to renewable power sources and to distribute or allocate workloads across this sort of distributed network, so that we can take advantage of where the environmentally beneficial power is available, as opposed to just wherever it is cheapest. When we add in the network, this has been historically kind of ignored in the energy efficiency equation, but there are more and more indications that 5G and generally wireless it needs to be considered more carefully. This has come out in some recent studies, not as a result, but as a recommendation. We need to look at this more carefully. The wireless radios need power, and then you put these 5G base stations where you need them for coverage, not for where the renewables are. So this is a real issue. As we go on the top of the data center, Moore's law is waning, so we expect continued increases in demand will also translate into increased energy requirements. So the power is going to start going up. So energy efficient designs will be critical, and cloud providers need to give their customers the ability, the information they need to make energy efficient choices. And finally, all of this gets, at the end of the day, managed by the software stack, because even the very good results that we've gotten with virtualization and containerization, they're fundamentally software processes, and the same needs to be extended to the full stack. So reducing IT's carbon footprint is complicated by not only by this stack of interrelated factors, but also the fact that different deployment modes may have different different implications from an environmental standpoint. So I just illustrate these here. We talk about them more in our document. Something we need to keep in mind. Questions, comments? There was some comments flowing by. I just want to. Okay, I see Garrett's statement, and we'll take a look. Any other comments? Okay. So, as Federico mentioned, we were working with the community over the last number of months to gather their priorities and their feedback about this strategic map and the way we have modeled the different interrelated problems that make up the complete picture of cloud computing strategy in Europe. Here's a quick report on this. We've gotten feedback from the community, namely cloud industry representatives, SMEs, as well as technical experts and researchers. And from those different perspectives aggregated, most of the focus is on the data-driven requirements. How do we help organizations to properly become data-driven and to enable their digital transformation? And to a slightly lesser extent, the need for more tools to support data awareness, as well as recommendations targeting a stronger EU IT services market. When we drill down into these areas, there's a kind of a modest level of interest in solutions in these three areas that I'd mentioned as far related to data awareness. When we go to the data-driven world, a lot of focus on solving that, adopting cloud-style technology and technology stacks. So what steps can we take to make that easier for organizations? And then the skills, performance, and security issues that have been addressed. Drilling down further to the actual IT services market, big focus on the hybrid and multi-cloud challenge and the related emerging edge ecosystem integration challenge, and to some extent some focus on services or recommendations targeting EU-based providers, not only of infrastructure and platform services, but also software. And then looking down in the foundational elements, again, and this is kind of the comment that was made in the chat, is that skills are very important. They're kind of out of our scope, but we want to highlight the fact that this is a pretty critical issue, and perhaps a less critical issue. I was surprised by the fact that it wasn't ranked highly, but this carbon neutral digital transformation is not something the community sees as important as skills. It's important, but not as important. And then finally, recommendations focusing on this intrinsic cybersecurity. So bringing all, did I do that? There we go, bringing it all together. A little bit of an eye test here. I apologize that, but you can see how the pieces fit together and the relative importance across this. So we'll collate this a bit further, but you can see the areas. I'm highlighting the areas which kind of have that 3-star focus. I'm going to go to the questions, but let's leave this up in case anybody has a particular comment or question about this this result, which not everybody will have seen. Okay, moving on. So I'm going to now explore the research recommendations that we've assembled, as well as the policy and development recommendations that we've assembled, just to map them to our strategic map. And again, you have the opportunity, and I hope you will take advantage of this opportunity to dive into some of the details on your own and to vote them up or down and sort of suggest some priorities for us. We do want to get the community's input on this. So on the research side, and when I say research, I'm deliberately including the R&D, the development piece of research. So a lot of these recommendations are not research problems. They're really about how do we develop something based on what we know from the research. So there was an exercise conducted by what's called the Future Cloud Cluster, and it's a group of researchers from a number of recently funded projects, and they assembled their own analysis of what is needed from a research perspective. They grouped it into 13 areas. This is kind of a pretty eye chart. This is a little more meaningful. So we have the cloud continuum, the multi-cloud requirements, the edge computing, and then in the very middle where these 3 circles intersect is kind of where we need solutions to enable federated cloud. So you can see how the different areas map to some of these specific use cases. And the specific challenges within each area, and they have different colors, can be mapped to another chart that highlights the priority, low to transformational, and the time frame for impact. Some are pretty short and some are rather long. So all of these are mapped out there. This is the researchers voting, if you will, their own assessment of the priority and timing of each of the things that they're talking about. But this is, we've incorporated their recommendations into our recommendations, and this gives you as part of the community an ability to offer your perspectives on that. Another view comes from the European Alliance for Industrial Data, Edge and Cloud. And this is this grouping of 27 key providers here in Europe. And this is a summary. This is their summary chart of all of the recommendations that they have put together. The light green numbers are R&D only. So if you scan the chart and sort of look at the different activities that are just light green, that's research or research and development. And then the dark green is research and development and deployment. So there's a lot of stuff that's dark green, and there's also a fair amount of stuff that's the light green. Maybe this is not, I hope it's coming through to you, but these recommendations have been captured in or incorporated into our master list of recommendations so that you'll have an opportunity to offer your opinion as well. So let's see how these things map out. So we're talking just research. Most of the recommendations focus on this and encourage this secure, trustworthy data sharing requirement. This is essentially if you will, the underpinnings of Digital Europe, the data spaces. So ecosystem middleware and runtimes, pan-European data sharing platforms, as well as 5 additional recommendations from other sources that touch on this area. A bit of a crossover item is end-to-end data pipelines that are somewhat industry specific, and then a few modest recommendations in the other 2 areas. Drilling down to the data-driven part of the stack, we see, and again, we're focusing on research requirements, research recommendations, a few in every area. So not a strong research topic, really. 2 recommendations from the European Alliance, the need for an open standard and open source stack, which would need to be developed, as well as managed platforms for industrialization. Those actually might belong down in the EU IT services market, but they're positioned as a research item as well. Drilling further down to the EU cloud market, several recommendations coming from the European Alliance. So we've got the cloud infrastructure control plane, a multi-cloud control plane, end-to-end orchestration, a variety of edge-related research projects that they're requesting. The FCRR is the Future Cloud Research Roadmap. This is the multicolored picture I showed you before. And 21 of their recommendations fall into this multi-cloud area. So this is touching a lot of different aspects of this. So from a research challenge standpoint, it's recognized by the researchers as a big problem, a big challenge to be addressed. And this actually aligns up pretty well with the needs of the market in terms of where the community would like to see some investment made. And then a few recommendations from a research standpoint in different areas as well. Drilling further down to the foundational aspects, the European Alliance has suggested a rather significant research project on data encryption. For example, trying to make fully homomorphic encryption work and be feasible, perhaps the use of quantum techniques of some sort, as well as the creation of a zero trust architecture that can be deployed. Looking at carbon neutral digital transformation, you have the need for an advanced data center infrastructure manager, zero carbon cloud, as well as low carbon infrastructure components feeding into that. Note that the Border Step Institute made a significant number of very useful research recommendations to assist the challenge of reaching carbon neutrality in our data centers. So that's captured in this item here. So feedback on some of these. Again, all of these are part of our online survey, and you can drill down in detail there. But any high-level comments from the group? Okay, moving on. So a similar presentation as before. The brown blobs today are deployment, and the purple blobs are policy recommendations. And we have some of the same proposals from the European Alliance appearing here because they were both research and deployment, R&D and deployment. So we see them repeated. And a few additional deployment recommendations in different areas, as well as a few policy areas. Here again, looking at the data-driven level, we see some repeated recommendations from the European Alliance. I would also like to note that there's, under build versus buy, you see the CISP label. The CISP Cloud Association has put together a set of recommendations that relate to procurement. And so we're capturing those as a set of policy recommendations. It's also a deployment recommendation or a procurement recommendation when you get right down to it for organizations, public sector organizations, to change the way they buy cloud services. Here at the level of the stronger EU IT services market, there is a bunch of stuff. The bigger blocks are from the European Alliance. They are proposing a suite of proposals, a suite of recommendations that the money really adds up. You've got the densification of the, densification of the cloud edge continuum with €6.5 billion investment. Some of it would be government, some of it would be industry. Over on the far left, upper left, you see close to €2.5 billion in investing in cloud and edge hardware to beef up the infrastructure providers. There are a range of investments, not only in basic capabilities, but also in the integration of some of these capabilities and the deployment of newly developed capabilities. So there's quite a program implicit in their technology roadmap. And we think this is a valuable set of recommendations, set of proposals that we wanted to share with the community, and we're giving you the opportunity to vote on those in the survey, so we hope you will. On top of that, you see the small circles, various specific proposals in different areas of both a deployment and a policy nature. The purple is for policy. And lastly, just calling out some 8 recommendations by the Border Step Institute that touch on multi-cloud coordination with the intent of improving energy and environmental efficiency. So there's a bit of crossover there, but a bit of a picture. So quite a broad range of actions that are possible to respond to the needs in this area. And finally, again, from a policy and deployment standpoint, we see also data encryption and zero trust, the low carbon infrastructure I mentioned before under research, as well as the need to support the recommendation to support the retrofitting of data centers to achieve greater environmental efficiency. And from a policy perspective, the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, CNDCP, has made 15 recommendations, which we've incorporated in our area, and there are some others from Border Step and other sources. So questions or comments at this point? Okay, so I think I have reached the end of my boring presentation. And I appreciate your attention, and I'm going to really open up the floor to free format comments from anybody who's here, and I really appreciate your joining us for this conversation. Anybody who'd like to offer some high-level comments, high-level feedback? This is great. This is terrible. You people are stupid. You people are the most amazing people we know, etc. whatever your feedback is. Oh, come on, somebody wants to rattle the cage. Not you, Federico.
May I ask a little question?
Of course.
Yeah,
that's what it's all about.
There are a number of recommendations that you've expressed. Who will be addressed to answer to that question? I mean, there's a number of recommendations made towards EU. Is the EU listening or taking up these recommendations, or will they do that?
Well, we can't speak to them. That's our job, which is to identify the recommendations from the community or the recommendations that the community feels are the most important to pass on. And yes, so the EU and the EC are targets for some of these recommendations. There are others that are focused on parts of the cloud industry that they arguably could address on their own. So we have different targets that we've identified in our recommendations. Whether any of those organizations will take this up is, it's out of our control, but we're certainly going to convey it. I do think that the European Alliance for Cloud, whatever the name is, that is kind of the ideal, shall we say, recipient of our report to say, okay, we've extended what you've done and we've added some other points and put it into a framework that can help you advance the needs of the cloud industry in Europe. So it might be their job to move that forward. There are several organizations, associations out there, CISPI is a great example, ECHO in Germany, that are already responsible for doing this. So the challenge for us is to present this, and hopefully that it will be taken up. Sorry, Gert, you were going to say?
No, thank you. It's a clear answer. Thanks for that.
Yeah, if I might add on top of what Mark said, of course, the process for us is more close in terms of engaging the Commission than the engagement of the industrial actor, because as a matter of fact, this was a request, one of the requests and the demands for the Commission, and for sure they appreciate that there is for them food to be digested. Then there is a whole set of internal process in the Commission that takes up on top of what we present them, and this of course is what is indeed outside of our control, but we have seen in other cases that the input is really transformed into some concrete and specific action part of programs. Maybe not all of it, they sub-select some specific items, but in general, I would say that this process is very useful to them, especially because compared to the consultation that they run themselves, which are very broad on specific topic, and also usually collect individual industrial or researcher inputs, our job is more like preparing them a summary, and that is already encompassing the different views, and that's why it is of course well received and important to them.
Okay, thanks, Federico. Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Enrique Rizzaga. I just want to make a couple of questions. The first one, I was quite surprised why the cloud computing is so much advanced in the northern country, while in Central and South Europe it's still a long way to go. How do you find out why is this situation? I mean, why the adoption of cloud computing is so much done in Southern and Central Europe?
I would say that we don't have answers as to why there are different rates of adoption in different parts of Europe. I'd say that kind of like Ariana's comment about the importance, the relevance of having local suppliers. It's a relevant question, but we don't have the answer. The point you're making is also important, but we haven't seen any information about how to resolve that situation, what the barriers are. I think it would be appropriate for us to recommend that these kinds of issues be examined in more detail to understand if there are some systemic barriers in different countries that make it difficult. I will say that, and we have two, there are two pieces to this. One is just an interest in the digital transformation process, and whether organizations are really interested in moving in this way. We get a feeling that some of the Northern European countries are sort of embracing this journey more than in Southern Europe, just in other countries. It's not about North or South, it's about just different countries have different attitudes about this. And the second point is that in some places, concerns about legalities, regulations, etc., concern about contracts may be holding people back more than in other places. And I can't answer that in a definitive way. And it's, you have to be careful that you're not just taking people's excuses,
Yeah.
but that's not the real reason. They're just saying, oh, I didn't do it because of GDPR. It's an easy thing to blame GDPR for the fact that you're not adopting the cloud, but there may be other issues going on.
Definitely also for the type of industries that we have, for example, in Spain.
Absolutely. It's just very hard to generalize this, but I do think we haven't seen more detailed, sort of country by country or sector by sector comparisons. We do some of that work in the Xcloud project. We did do sector by sector considerations, and we identified sector specific barriers that reflect a bit about the market structure. But we haven't extended that onto a country basis.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. The other question, well, we didn't say it's a question. It's one of the answers that I got while I was just asking some stakeholders on the cloud computing industry, especially from the data centers, when we talk about this carbon footprint and how just to go to the Green Deal. They say that there is a big threat with the cryptocurrency mining. So even if we just going to reduce or we have the air cooling or or just use renewable energy, there will be always just a demand for energy because they will always just be trying just to mine more NFTs or so what is your how do you find out some kind of answers from that? What is the industry saying?
Well, I think the presence of Bitcoin mining or generally the creation of some sort of the next block in your chain, if you're doing proof of work, that does consume cycles, and that consumes energy, and that's going to have an impact on the environment. That's absolutely true. The quantity of that is a bit of a debate. People are worried about it. Some people have come up with numbers that are kind of bigger than everything else, which doesn't make sense at all. So it's not really clear what's really happening there. In addition, people are moving away from proof of work and more towards proof of stake. So the so-called gas costs in an Ethereum or other kind of blockchain structure it's fundamentally driving how the markets behave. So it's not free. It costs money. People are trying to charge for it or trying to get that money back. And that's the one benefit that throughout the IT structure is, whether it's air cooled or liquid cooled or high density compute or low density compute, the energy has to be paid for. It's not free. So as long as there's a price on it, people will optimize their spending on energy. So the question then is, how can we use pricing schemes to make people move towards renewable sources? Now, I will say that coming back to the question of distributed ledger technologies, lots of people are proposing these for very reputable reasons. And therefore we can't exclude DLT technologies from the mix just because it's DLT. We need to figure out, basically it needs to be priced and people need to decide what they want to do. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question. It's complicated, but
it is. It is complicated, yes.
Sure.
But thanks a lot. Anyhow.
Anything else, folks? And thank you, Enrique.
Yeah, I want just maybe to add a little differentiator that that I think it's well expressed in the white paper. But the move from the let's say just cloud or cloud-centric services to a more distributed one, from the point of view of the energy, is really quite a complexity, because there are many factors we don't measure today, and that's then it is difficult to save energy if you don't measure it properly. And in case of the single data center, of course, this is much more easy. You know what is coming in and you know what's going out, and you can do easier optimization. And in the end-to-end provision, there is, I think, a lot of research and policy instrumentation that needs to be put in place to pave the way for energy efficiency.
Okay, thanks, Federico. We're basically at the end of our scheduled time. I would be very happy to include any other, if you want to flip comments to us, we would be very happy to receive them. The online surveys we're going to keep open on the recommendations in research policy and deployment areas. We're going to keep those open for another couple of weeks to gather the community's input and incorporate that. I think you're getting a pretty good snapshot of what our final report is going to look like, once we do prioritize and present the specific recommendations. I know, by the way, that the recommendations that are on the online surveys, I apologize for not every one of them is, shall we say, has as much text as you might like to have an immediate idea of what it is, but they are complicated topics, and we do provide the links to the source material to help you dive into it if you want to learn more. So we look forward to that input through those surveys, and I hope you'll invite your colleagues with understanding of this area to also fill out the surveys. It's open, and we'd like the broader input as well. So if you're working with communities and want to share this with them and invite them to add their voice, that would be much appreciated. Okay, any other comments? Otherwise, we'll probably bring this to a close. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone, for your attention. People are starting to drop off now, but I was gratified to see that the people we had were sticking around for most of the presentation. So hopefully it was interesting for everybody. And if there are any points of concern or questions, I really look forward to your feedback.
Thanks, Matt. It was great.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Thank you, Enrique.